So out of all the Apple Pro desktops, I have to say the 10-year reign of their early aluminum enclosures from around 2003 to 2013 is probably my favorite. It all started with the PowerMac G5, and it was at that point that they started moving away from plastic cases with the door mechanism as their preferred choice. And while it was sad that you couldn't do that awesome reveal with the new design, it also had some cool improved features. The earlier PowerPC cases really were kinda clunky and insane on the inside, given how they had to implement water cooling and freaking 9 internal fans to cool the higher end models. But starting in 2006, when they transitioned over to Intel, they've managed to free up quite a bit of space and actually utilize some user-friendly features. I love how easy it is to swap the storage on these guys, and also if before you had to move the fan out of the way to upgrade the memory, these newer models had the entire memory assembly on two daughter cards, which made it real simple to change out your RAM. Heck, you could even upgrade your GPU with a standard NVIDIA or AMD version, and also your CPU, all of which I've done to my particular Mac Pro 2.1 I have sitting under my desk to this very day. And yeah, I've talked about it, and it serves various functions. One, it's my go-to Windows XP gaming PC, and also a Snow Leopard machine. I have it set up with Boot Camp, and it all works very well. And since it has 4 easily accessible drive trays, I use it to offload and store some of the overflow of data, so sort of like a home server. I also use its legacy features a lot, like those optical drives, and I have it hooked up to my monitor's second HDMI port, so I can just switch between that and my main rig. And it's funny, since back when it was released, this thing was among the very best and most powerful computers you could have bought for quite a pretty penny, and it was used for its workstation capabilities for things like video production and graphic design. And here I am like 20 years later, just casually running it like once a month to play Doom 3 or Half-Life or something. And with Apple complementing their lineup with a smaller consumer-grade non-all-in-one design, the Mac Mini, and later almost completely substituting the Pro desktop with a tiny footprint machine, the Mac Studio, it seems that this form factor had all but disappeared from their lineup, not to mention that it was at first entirely replaced by that trash can flop, and later brought back with the infamous cheese grater accents. But I think in 2025 it's time to bring that design back, and while I have seen people put their Mac Minis in a Mac Pro-like case, I had something else in mind, and it was all made possible by the good folks from GLC 3DP, whose prints I've used before, and they're by far the best quality 3D prints I've seen and used myself. I've literally just uploaded the STL files to their website, chose the appropriate material, color, and other aspects, and upon getting it approved, I had my prints here in no time, all packaged up beautifully and exactly like I've imagined them. So if you'd like to do this project yourself, or you need anything else 3D printed or a PCB made, these guys are just great, and you'll find a link to their site in my video description. As far as what design and files I've used, well, I still have very little skill designing these things, but fortunately sites like Thingiverse and Printables provide a ton of free or very low cost files from all over the community, and I've settled on this particular one, which was designed to house a Raspberry Pi. So shout out to SASP for providing the community with an awesome free design, and even though it was intended to be used with a totally different device, I wanted to instead use something that I've acquired recently and I've also made a video on, and it's this little SBC computer running Intel's Alder Lake N150 CPU. Now the reason I chose this is because, well, it's actually a full-blown computer, much like the Mac Pro, and it's designed to run Windows 11, and as I've shown in that review video, I was really impressed with the performance given how small this thing is, and even though it doesn't come close to what you'd get on like a modern PC tower with a dedicated GPU, I'm pretty sure it's more than a serious match for the top-of-the-range workstation tower from 2006. So let's see, have we really gotten to the point where you could have the power of a 50-pound, $3,000 Mac Beast from 2006 in a 6x4-inch single-board PC? I was certainly very interested to find the answer to that question, but come on, before just comparing the two, we had to spruce up this little guy to make the competition more interesting. So we had to get this Mac Pro skin fitted to our mini PC, and to be honest, when I was ordering these prints I had a different board in mind, and I wasn't sure how well this guy would even fit, but it turns out that just my luck, it fits pretty much perfectly. I mean, what are the odds? As if it was meant to be. But before getting ahead of myself, I just wanted to see how all of this would actually fit together, and after inspecting it and asserting the situation, I've decided to do a couple of things. First, since this thing has no fans or other cooling solutions other than just passive heat sinks, I wanted to try using some small case fans to see if we could get the temps down. I've decided to use some small 40mm fans I had lying around and mount them in the front so that they would suck the air in through those tiny holes, since that's what the aluminum mesh is there for on the original, and then blow the air out the back. These take 5 volts DC, which is perfect since I can power them with the built-in USB ports. The only issue is that, well, usually with fans and computers you'd have like a temperature control sensor which would then talk to the fans and adjust the RPM accordingly, but I don't really think that's necessary, so these will just run at a flat RPM. I wanted to utilize those 3 USB-A ports, and in this case each fan would get its own port which provides 5 volts and should give a nice silent and steady airflow, which would hopefully help this thing with the temps. After soldering some spare USB leads to the positive and the negative wire of the fans and making sure they'd spin up when connected, I wanted to see if it would all fit in the case, and since I haven't done any measurements prior to fitting all this, yeah, it proved to be a very tight fit and there'd be no way to fit the USB connectors on the top. So I had to get some male USB connectors and break away the excess plastic so that I'd have just the pins themselves to solder to and still be able to fit all that in the case, and while it was kind of a hassle, I managed to do it in the end. Also, one more thing I wanted to add internally was a USB-A hub, since I'd have no way of accessing those ports on the top, so I took an appropriately sized hub which I had somewhere in my parts bins. And at first it wouldn't fit, but after stripping it of all the plastic, I was left with a nice board I could attach alongside my PC, and I did that using some mounting tape just to protect the exposed pins on the bottom and to stop it from sliding around. And then I've used the existing VESA mounting bracket since it had the correct screw spacing, and I screwed it to the mounting holes of the PC itself, and that worked out great. I also had to cut the end and solder in my own slim male connector, which left me with a nice set of USB ports I could use with my Bluetooth dongles or a USB stick. I wanted to of course check if all of this was working as I was building it, and sure enough the fans were blowing fine once the computer was turned on, as well as that hub. You can see me using a USB flash drive along my Bluetooth dongles. So once I was sure it was all working, it was time to try fitting it all in. Those fans, however, yeah, I'd need to mount them, and I've decided not to screw them or glue them not to damage the enclosure, so I just used some mounting tape along with some rubber wedges to create a friction fit, which really worked well and I had no issues whatsoever. They held in place great. But before fitting all of these things more permanently, there was one more crucial step in this build, and that was of course the exterior color. I'd of course have to paint it since this bare plastic is an off-white color, and I've decided on a couple of different types and shades of silver, mainly spray paint, but I'll add on some accents with a small brush as well. The plastic used in this print is an SLA resin, and it's way different and better than your typical PLA or nylon used in most home printers, and I mean it's pretty much as sturdy as an injected molded part would be, and the surface is pre-sanded and ready for painting as is. So I proceeded to lay on the first coat of this metallic silver, which would give the brushed aluminum look of the Mac Pro case. I actually tried painting the back cover first just to see how it would look like, and I was quite happy with the result. It's a very light gray metallic color, like I've said, anodized aluminum, but some parts like that Apple logo in the middle has a slightly darker sheen to it, so I wanted to do a second coat as well for that particular section. I've carefully masked it off using some masking tape and paper, and then I just hit it with some of that darker paint, and I was quite happy with the result. I think it matches the original quite well. I was also careful to do a light enough coating and to avoid spraying from too close up to avoid the drips and especially the paint pooling on those tiny holes, and overall, yeah, I think it turned out rather nicely. I also gave the whole thing a protective clear coat, and since I wanted to preserve the dull anodized look of the aluminum, I went with a matte finish, first testing it out on that back cover, and after making sure it looked right, I hit the entire thing. Looking at the finished result, I could totally see this thing being a great display piece all on its own, but we're actually going to be building a computer in it, so it was time to put it all together and see how it compares to our Mac Pro. After that, it was time for a test fit, and damn, sometimes I impress even myself. Nah, just kidding. There are plenty of ways in which this whole thing could be cooler. For example, if it had a removable side panel like the original, or if those little optical drive slots actually moved and housed, I don't know, some extra USB ports or something. But that would require some additional engineering, and this is actually a nice simple project all of you could do yourself and be left with a pretty nice machine. Yeah, anyways, it looks cool, but how does it perform? Well, it was time to sit it next to its big brother and run some things side by side, along with an appropriate Apple Cinema display, which would have been used on a Mac Pro around that time period. And what sort of things? Well, since this thing has a 64-bit Windows XP installation, I've decided to run some software that would be compatible with both systems. I've briefly considered installing XP on the mini PC, but I wasn't able to find all the legacy drivers, and I just wasn't sure I'd be able to get all the necessary functions working. Same thing with the Mac Pro. While I could install Windows 10 or 11 on here, just from personal experience, I know how sucky the performance can be, and I didn't want to hamper the experience by having a bloated OS on this old guy. Now, you might obviously ask why I just don't put Linux on both or Hackintosh the mini PC. The software that I wanted to run in particular games just aren't well suited to Linux, at least the releases I have on hand, and I didn't have too much luck with Hackintoshing, and even if I was to go that route, I'd probably end up installing a newer version of macOS, which this old Mac Pro doesn't support natively, so I'd just end up messing up the performance in the end. Bottom line, I wanted to have an era-appropriate software on these guys, so we're sticking with OSs they all feel comfortable with. And there are indeed plenty of software they both run just fine, and I wanted to start with the most exciting thing, which is of course gaming. In the last episode, I've shown this thing doing pretty good with late 2000s, early 2010s titles, so I was curious how our big boy would do with those. And unlike our little integrated mini PC, this thing had some serious components for its day, including this killer GPU, the Nvidia Quadro FX 4500, which was probably among the best graphics cards when it was released exactly 20 years ago from when I'm writing this script on July 28, 2005. This beast rocks an astounding for its date 512 megs of VRAM and cost a freaking $2,500 at launch. So I was really curious as how it would compare to our competitors' integrated Intel UHD graphics. First off, the OG Crysis, which ran at about 50 FPS average on medium settings at 1024x768, which is what I've used to test all these games on both systems. Crysis is a great example since it's a great in-between title and can be surprisingly hard to run on many older and newer systems. Like here, the game runs about as well as you could hope for in terms of frame rates, but it's the screen tearing that's kinda ruining the experience somewhat, and this is common across newer and incompatible GPUs. In comparison, the OG Mac Pro has no screen tearing issues, but it's running noticeably worse in terms of frame rates, around half on average, which would still be considered very impressive back in the day on medium settings. And yeah, while these older titles might be more compatible with things like Nvidia GPUs and Windows XP, well, 20 years of progress still takes its toll on the overall performance, and we see that with Crysis for sure. Moving on, one more thing we tried running on the mini PC review was Modern Warfare 3, and it performed decently at around 30 to 40 FPS average on high settings at 1680 by 1050, which again made it very enjoyable and impressive, especially considering we're running on integrated graphics. Our big boy here was running at 1024x768 since it was crashing on higher resolutions, but also on high settings, and while we did get close to that 30 FPS average, you could just tell that it wasn't nearly as smooth with some frequent stutters. And again, this game is running from a SATA SSD, and while it's not nearly as fast as the Mini's M.2 NVMe drive, it's not like it's running off of decades old spinning Rust 2. Overall, I would rate the performance as somewhat on par with the Mini, although I do think technically the Mini just has some objective advantages. But that doesn't mean that all things necessarily run better on newer machines, since some games were specifically optimized for certain type of hardware and OS, and UT 2004 is a great example, since although it ran very well on the Mac Pro Mini with over 100 FPS even on holy shit settings, the OG Mac Pro just blew it away with over 200 frames per second, even on higher resolutions. This is probably my favorite machine to play this stuff on. Just awesome. Doom 3 is another great example of the OG Mac Pro just crushing it. I mean, this game was a technical tour de force, an absolute juggernaut to run, and this thing just casually runs it at ultra high settings with cool and steady 60 FPS. Now, the Mini also does a similarly good job, but to me it's just not as impressive since it's so far along from when this game was initially released. One more thing I really also wanted to compare is video playback, since I was quite impressed with the Mini PC's ability to not just play 4K locally and online, but also edit it. And while the experience certainly wasn't very pleasant, and the render times were several times more than on my main rig, I was still blown away that it could do that at all. But yeah, roll back 20 years and this poor Mac Pro can indeed play a 1080p movie quite well, not just locally, but it can actually stream the damn thing from the damn interwebs. Now, as far as online videos go, unfortunately, even though I do remember watching YouTube on my XP machines not too long ago, using things like MyPal, Firefox, ESR, or Chrome, I was just unable to get any, and I mean any browser to load YouTube at all. It just wouldn't let me go past the unsupported browser error page. That being said, I was able to find some other platforms to stream videos from, and while it could do 360, 480, and even freaking 720p no problem, once I got to 1080, yeah, it would just barely play it, like a frame a second, so 4K is unfortunately way beyond this thing's capabilities. Locally, 4K also doesn't look too good, as you can see, but it can at least play it, and that's kinda impressive. And yeah, some of those limitations could certainly be addressed by having a more modern operating system on here, but that wouldn't actually help the video playback. In fact, it might even hamper it, just because of how light XP is compared to something like Windows 10. One thing we also have to take into consideration is the freaking power consumption, since those dual Xeon CPUs, along with the rest of the architecture and that freaking beast of a GPU, draw around 500 to 600 watts under normal to heavier loads, while our Mac Pro Mini draws, and I kid you not, something like 5 watts on idle and 15 watts under load. Which, I mean, that's just incredible. The amount of power PCs were able to concentrate on these SBCs. Speaking about the power, I forgot to mention, yeah, those fans were definitely making a noticeable improvement with around 15 to 20% lower temperatures across the board, which makes sense. I mean, they put fans in computer cases for a reason. As far as comparing these two computers, I think this picture is a perfect visual representation of that, since you have this freaking 50-pound, 500-watt, 3000 bucks dual Xeon, dual GPU Link monster, and then 20 years later, you have the exact same raw performance and then some in a package that literally weighs less and has less volume than those RAM slots. Pretty cool to say the least. And no wonder, I mean, when you look at it the other way around, it's amazing that this old bastard, which has DDR2 memory, SATA drives, and dual Xeons, can compete quite well with this wonder PC from the future, and for that, I applaud it, as I do all my veteran PCs. And we sure did honor it properly, putting this mini PC in this Mac Pro case, since it was kinda bland looking, and this way we were actually able to improve those thermals by quite a bit, so we might squeeze a bit more performance out of it. We'll see. Oh, and I suppose the last thing to do is to add the backplane slash cover to this thing, which I've modified to fit all my connectors. I've cut a larger hole, and yeah, that is a piece of cork stuck in there for secret purposes. And I suppose that's it for today's project, and it sure was fun to do. Hopefully it was fun for you to watch and follow along too. Maybe you want to make a Mac Pro Mini yourself, in which case you should definitely print the model using GLC PCB services. They're just plain better. And if you enjoy watching me do projects like this, you might want to check out some of my other videos too. I do them every week. Reviews, repairs, restorations, and all sorts of nerdy tech stuff. If you'd like to support what I do and get early access to my videos, you can join my Patreon for just $1 a month, or more if you'd like, and I usually have a couple of videos there for my patrons to enjoy first. If you'd like to chat with me and other users, you can join our Discord server. All the links will be in the video description, along with all the links to products and services I've used for this video, if you'd like to do this project yourself. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon. Cheers!